All right, let's try this again. Let me know if you guys hear me now. We got Rex and Devin on. So there we go. All right, awesome. Again, I wanted to reintroduce everything that I just said that nobody kind of heard. But again, thank you guys for joining us today on GTS. I'm actually really excited because this is something that we've been working on. Organization, it's called ASMP. ASMP actually is about to celebrate their 80th anniversary. Is one of the organizations, that has been backing creatives for a very long time. And I'm really excited because now things are changing. And it's something that was long overdue, something that we at Geekoto have actually kind of been, working towards as well. So to be able to pair up with people that see this, have the same vision is fantastic. But I'm going to introduce actually, Tom. Tom, welcome to the podcast. And please introduce yourself.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here, and thanks for having me. Thanks for having me today, and thanks for the kind words about ASMP. We've
absolutely, man.
We've really enjoyed getting to work with you, getting to work with Geekoto, and we're excited about what we can do in the future with you guys. And so my name's Tom Madry. I'm the CEO of ASMP, and ASMP is a photography and visual creator trade association. So what we do is fight for the rights of creators. We do that in the courts, we do that in government, we do that in Congress, and we do that by connecting creators with other creators in our chapters around the country, around the world. So really excited to talk about all the stuff that gets me excited, which sometimes can be a little nerdy. I am a lawyer after all. So things like copyright law and AI and all the hot button issues, that's what we do at ASMP.
Which is fantastic, which is one of the things that I'm very excited about, because obviously now in the age of AI, it's fantastic. And actually protecting creativity in the age of AI is what we are going to be talking about today. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit to what you said about ASMP being about, for photographers. And then what was that second part that you added?
And visual creators.
Visual creators, yeah. Now, let's go back. Has ASMP always been that?
So no.
Okay.
ASMP 80 years ago started as the Society of Magazine Photographers, SMP. Later on, they changed it to the American Society of Magazine Photographers. And then in the 80s, they changed it to the American Society of Media Photographers. But you don't hear us talk about that too much anymore because that name is not nearly as inclusive as ASMP has become. And part of that reason is because every visual creator, whether you're a cinematographer or filmmaker, you're a content creator, you're a YouTuber, or you're a photographer, professional amateur photographer, you're dealing with the same issues. You're dealing with people stealing your work. You're dealing with people taking advantage of the work that you do, putting things online, not knowing where they end up. That's who we work to protect, all visual creators.
That's fantastic. And again, and the reason why I wanted to emphasize that part is because that is the part that makes me very, happy and excited, because the majority of organizations that are out there have not really evolved. They've been the one trick pony type stuff. They've been doing the same thing over and over. And it's time that, creators, and creative people get the benefits that a lot of, photographers for a long time, got, which is fantastic. But one of the things that I've been noticing with, currently right now is, for example, with content creators and stuff like that, they have had to evolve, and there's no really kind of organizations, like ASMP, stuff like that welcomes, them. So to know that there are, changes coming or whatever, and hopefully those things are kind of followed is going to be fantastic. So again, guys, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So grab yourself, your drink. Here we love tequila. We're getting some gritona today. We've done this tequila before, so that's why we don't have the bottle. But we also want to make sure that you guys, with your questions and stuff like that, please leave them in the chat. We'll read some of your questions, about stuff like that. We don't always have somebody of this caliber in here where we get a lot of nerds. We're a bunch of nerds here, but to have somebody who actually knows the law when it comes to this, to, for creatives and all that, please leave your comments. We're gonna get into some pretty heavy stuff in that stuff. So again, questions and all that stuff, leave them in the chat, and we'll go from that. So, all right, Tom. So going into how long have you been with ASMP and stuff like that? Give me a little bit of background about ASMP, and from beginnings to now, how things and how long have you been in the company, and basically, what has been the changes that have been happening?
Well, I first joined ASMP when I was in 11th grade. My high school photography teacher taught me about ASMP, told me about ASMP, and I joined as a student way back then. And I was always passionate about photography, and I knew I wanted to be a photographer. And so after I left high school and graduated, I ended up at the Brooks Institute of Photography, started my photography career, was a nature and wildlife photographer and editorial photographer for a number of years. And all along that time, I continued to be a member of ASMP because ASMP had this book, and the book was called Professional Business Practices in Photography. And there were 7 editions of it that had run for like the last 30 years. It was the only place you could find information on how do I license work? How do I charge a magazine? How do I do all of that? And we were so excited I was so excited as an emerging photographer to find a group that actually was telling me what I cared. I didn't need you to tell me how to light something. I need you to tell me how to write a contract, how to get paid when someone doesn't want to pay you, right?
Oh, okay.
And that's what ASMP has always been about, the business and legal side of photography. And so, for so many years, ASMP focused almost exclusively on professional photographers that were in the commercial and advertising world. That expanded in the last 30, 40 years to many different types of photographers, architectural photographers, photojournalists, the whole gamut have become ASMP members. And in fact, it's really cool. This is our 80th year. And going into the ASMP archives, you get to see the greats of photography that were members. Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, Richard Avedon. So many of the photographers that have been ASMP members, Henri Cartier-Bresson. It's so cool to have 80 years of history.
Absolutely. And for you guys, in past episodes, we've talked about a lot of these photographers, especially, Cartier-Bresson, which, the grandfather of street photography, as he's known. We've talked a lot about him, and Avedon, one of my favorite editorial photographers, of all time. So it's fantastic. I've actually, not very, very deeply, but I have been able to see some of the archives that you guys have, and it's absolutely like mind blowing. Now, with ASMP, you guys have, I know you guys have offices in Dallas, which, you guys are our neighbors here. You have offices in Washington and San Francisco, correct?
San Francisco, yep.
Correct. But you guys actually have chapters all across the nation.
We do.
Yeah.
We do.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. We have 38 chapters around the country. And some of these chapters are in places where ASMP has a physical presence like you're talking about, but some is, for example, New York is our largest chapter. And that's where ASMP started back in 1944. And so what's great about our chapter system is for so long, and even now, it's one of the only resources that creatives have to go and meet other people who are dealing with the same things they're dealing with. It's not only to learn about things like pricing and dealing with clients in your area, but that is such a resource that you can't even get online. This is, hey, how do I work with this company down the street? And this other person will say, hey, I worked for them last week. Let me tell you who to talk to over there. ASMP, the community aspect of ASMP is what our chapters really exemplify. And so we kind of have two things going on at ASMP. We have our large-scale projects, our advocacy projects on things like, making changes to the law that are fair for all creators. And then we have our community, our 38 chapters around the country, and we're really proud of both sides of that.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. And that's one of the things that I think it's missing, or that has been missing with like or other organizations, even though we've talked, about PPA before, we've talked about WPPI. And PPA does have like different chapters, according to state, I believe, and such. But the one thing that I always have said, especially now, is the evolution of what organizations have done. And like anything else, if things get kind of stagnant, well, unfortunately, those things just don't survive. And right now, we're in a time that change. I mean, it changes by the day, and we're gonna get a little bit more into that. So I'm gonna, I have some questions and stuff like that, and we actually have Ruxus Rome's just sent a question. The first question that he says, how do you suggest approaching stolen content on social media? I understand stitching and people doing voiceovers on your videos as a review. I mean, like pages that straight up.
Yeah, that straight up steal your stuff. So look, when we're talking about the law, I always try to make a distinction between things that are legal and then things that you can actually accomplish, right? Because it's easy for me to say, yeah, that's a violation of your copyright, but that might not mean anything, to the person who's stealing your work or to you. So let's talk about social media, right? When what you just described, where someone is stitching your work or making a comment on your work, and in the law they call that commentary, that's actually a protected part of the law. And that's under fair use law in many cases. Because there should be an exception in copyright law that allows people to comment and make criticism of and add to the work that you've already created, right? That's an okay thing to do. And that's what a lot of these platforms are designed to do. But stealing your work outright is just a blatant violation of copyright law. So bear with me for about 2 minutes while I give like a brief primer on copyright law. So in the US, the minute you create a work, and so for photographers, we say the minute you press that shutter, you now own a copyright in your work. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to pay any money. It's yours. By law, it's yours. And what a copyright means is that you are the only one that has these exclusive rights. You're the only one who can do them. You're the only one who can reproduce the work. You're the only one who can display the work. You're the only one who can make copies of the work or create derivative works from that work. And if anyone does those things, they are violating your copyright. I mean, that's the bottom line. They're violating copyright. And so then the question is, as you so reasonably put it, what do you do? What do you do when that happens? I think there's a few things that you should be thinking about as a creator. One, reach out to the other side. If it's something where you think you might be able to affect some kind of partnership or discussion, right? Now, there's a difference between if I go online and some big multinational company is stealing my work, or if it's someone, across town who you think you can collaborate with. Because my goal as a lawyer is to keep people out of court. And it is not good for any photographer, any creator to end up in a big legal fight, right? So the first thing is try to reach out. Try to have a conversation with the other side. Say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure if you realize you're violating my copyright. Here are some ways we can remedy this, right? And then we can talk about some of those ways in the future if you want to. But what if someone's just straight up stole your work and you don't want it? You don't want that. You want it down. You don't agree with what they're talking about, whatever the case is. All these platforms have ways where you can let them know that there's a copyright violation. So whether you're on YouTube or TikTok or Instagram, whatever it is, you can alert them through a mechanism called the DMCA, which is at the bottom of almost all of these websites, and say, hey, there's been a copyright violation here and you need to take a closer look at it. That's not always going to work, but it's a really good first step. After that, there's a lot of different techniques you can use to try to get your work taken down. But in general, you've already gotten in front of the game by keeping an eye on where your work is. What I always tell members is, look, the first time you find that someone's stolen your work, you should just assume that 100 other people have done it. And you have to figure out a way to protect your work while not letting it affect you, create new work. So many members we see get so focused on the fact that this bad thing happened or that bad thing happened, and it stops them from doing what they do best, which is creating amazing visual content. And that's always what you want to have in the back of your mind.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. All right, guys. With all of this stuff, obviously, Tom is a mountain of information. So take notes. Also, this is going to stay. These lives always stay in our channel, so you guys can go back and read. And we actually have them now as podcasts as well. So you please, you can go back and all this stuff. And this is not the first time we're going to have Tom. So I'm putting you on the hook right now.
I'm ready.
So we'll be having many more of those. So again, take notes, for this and everything that's going on, because we're just kind of getting started on this. So Rexus says, thank you so much. You're great. He's invested. Rexus, make sure, you guys can actually become members of ASMP, and that's one of the big benefits that ASMP has, that, obviously the CEO is the lawyer, and so he's going to be talking about a lot of that stuff. So if I'm not mistaken, you guys said they can actually get a discount on their membership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We created a coupon just for you guys in Geekoto. It's just Geekoto 15 gets you 15% off any new membership. We have memberships starting at our basic photographer level at $100, going up to our professional level, which is $335. Whatever the case is, check out our website. Hear what we're talking about today. I think you'll find value in it.
Absolutely. So remember, guys, Geekoto 15 will get you 15% off the new memberships and stuff like that. It's extremely well worth it. I'm a member of it, so I want to make sure that, again, I'm going to emphasize this. It's not only for photographers; they are supporting creatives, across the board. So if you think that it was only for photography and stuff like that, no, they're changing this. So this is going to help, photographers, videographers, content creators, and stuff like that across the board. So, all right, let's kind of get back to this. So nowadays, with everything that's kind of going on, do you think the creatives are more empowered or more under threat than ever before?
Yeah, under threat. I know we're going to dive more into AI in a bit, but I always want to just frame this in the context of the greatest theft of intellectual property in the history of the world has occurred in the last few years. And it's when all of the AI companies scraped the entire web and took all the content and the videos and the images to train the AI platform. No one was asked permission. And if you had your work on the internet in the last 3 years, your work was stolen. That's a threat that we couldn't have anticipated even just a few years ago, right?
Which was something, I'm sorry to cut you off on that part, which was something that kind of Adobe got in hot water with. Yeah. Because there was something that was coming up. I know as a photographer, when that kind of came up, it made me think twice about what I was going to do, because technically they were going into my edits, into the stuff that I was going to do to train their AI editor to do all these things without, anybody's, and either you liked it or you didn't. If you signed up for it, that was it. So that's so you definitely think that it's under threat. So I did definitely want to do that. And here's the thing. One of the things that we do here is we call out the things what it is. It doesn't matter whether you're a juggernaut as Adobe or anything like that. However, Adobe did go back on some of that stuff. I'm not well aware if things like that were kind of ironed out or not, but I know that there was a lot of creatives that would happen. So with that going.
Well, I want to talk about that for a second, because this is a perfect example of what ASMP does and what organizations like ASMP can do. Our members started emailing us last year, and it wasn't directly to what you're talking about, but Adobe had come out with a marketing campaign, and it said, skip the photo shoot, use our generative AI features.
Yeah.
And within about 48 hours, we received more letters from our membership than any other issue we've ever seen. It was like, look, we're being sold out in every direction, and now we're being sold out by Adobe. And so we wrote an open letter to Adobe, And I got to say, I totally agree with you that you call out juggernauts when bad things are happening. That's what ASMP is all about. At the same time, Adobe has come to the table with us and talked with us every step of the way and changed things like you're talking about. So we're like, look, you have to be more transparent with creators. You have to let them know what they're doing, what you're doing with their images and their data, and you have to give them a way to not do that. Adobe came back and apologized to our membership, apologized to the visual community at large for indicating that, you could just skip the photo shoot, that photographs weren't valuable, that kind of thing. And we've been heartened by the response, not only of Adobe, because one of the great things about ASMP and one of the great things about being around for 80 years is that we're able to call these companies and get them to listen to us. And so a few years ago, you may recall that Instagram always made it so that others could embed your work on websites. Now, embedding is an option that you can turn on or off. The reason you can do that is because we met with Instagram for months and said, look, you cannot do this without giving creators the choice if they want their work to be embedded. And finally, they came back and they said, yeah, we totally understand. And so now on your professional business accounts, you can choose whether or not to allow embedding of your imagery that's on Instagram. That's a huge win.
Yeah.
Those are the type of large scale advocacy things that organizations like ASMP can do, and things we're really proud of.
No, absolutely. And those are the things, because I do remember when the open letter was written, it wasn't because of pressure of anything. As a matter of fact, I hadn't even voiced my opinion, with you guys or whatever. And then all of a sudden I see this open letter, and it was within hours that I remember that came out, and I was like, holy smokes. And I'm going to make this very clear. You guys were the only ones that did it.
Yeah.
When that came out, I don't know if that's changed, but you guys were the only ones that kind of stood up for creatives at that time. So it's something that goes a long, long way, when it comes to being able to stand behind, creators, photographers, videographers. And when I say creators, from now on, I'm just going to say creatives. That's going to basically be the bubble of everything.
Perfect.
Just because that's where it's, and that's where things have been moving. At the one time it was photographers, videographers. No, now it's creators that is going to basically encompass everything that kind of goes on. So again, guys, if you guys have questions or anything like that, please, put them in the comments. We're going to, we're just kind of getting started on this part. So definitely being part of an organization that's going to stand behind you, always will have its benefits. And we're going to be talking obviously about ASMP today. We'll be calling about other organizations that are out there and stuff like that. But ASMP obviously is because you're here. You were kind enough to come out here and definitely be an open book, about everything that's going on. So how is the definition now with everything that's kind of that is happening? How has the definition of professional photographers kind of evolved within the last decade, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll even, I know you said last decade, but I'll even, lengthen it out to the last 20, 30 years, because when I was coming up as a photographer, I was just on the divide between film and digital. So my first year and a half of photography school was all film based, and the last year and a half was all digital. And that was such a change for photography, right? Where photographers had to totally rethink the way that they were doing their work and how they were going to stay in business. And so when we look from that period to now, there's been so much that has changed. And I think that one thing that we see regularly is photography used to have a barrier to entry for the highest levels that dealt with equipment, and that made it so that, and I'm talking 30 years ago, and that made it so that, you literally couldn't get certain sports images without the motor drive that some of the bigger companies made. And over the last decades, we've seen an ability of equipment manufacturers to level that playing field. And so it blows my mind now what kind of image quality can be made in the craziest places. One of my first commercial jobs out of photography school was back here in Texas, and it was photographing what was then the Nokia Theater out in Grand Prairie. And we rented a helicopter to photograph the Nokia Theater at a huge expense to the client. It was one of my first jobs. I did it with a partner of mine, Mark McWilliams back then. He is an architectural photographer. Now you could do that with a $200 drone, something that we paid $30,000 to do for an hour, and it would probably be better. So one of the biggest changes is that a professional photographer right now, a professional creator, can be anyone. And there's not those barriers that we've seen in the past. And I think that's wonderful, because what you have is a world in which what's being rewarded is your creativity and your skill and your vision and your passion, not just do you have the money to buy the most expensive thing that's out there. And so we're really excited about some of those changes.
That's great. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, equipment was a big thing now, and I think that's one of the great things that is happening currently right now with the amount of equipment and inexpensive. And I'm gonna brag a little bit about ourselves, which is one of the things that we wanted to do. We wanted to be able, as a professional photographer, having my own studio and being this kind of like my livelihood. That was one of the things. You have to make conscious business decisions, and at times you couldn't find the equipment, or you couldn't buy the equipment, or you couldn't afford the equipment, to make these things. And when companies, kind of step out of that to be able to give affordable equipment, so that you're not, a big part of your budget or a big part of your profits don't go into that, always makes a great thing. And technology now is making that a lot easier, which is fantastic, which is great. But also, that's where some of the dangers, in my opinion, kind of come in, because with social media and everything else that is kind of going around and stuff like that, do you think that the market can also get oversaturated because of it?
I absolutely do. And I think that's what so many people struggle with. Right now, and this, we talk about this a lot at ASMP, because right now, you can go on Instagram and find not hundreds, not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but millions of photographers that do the work that you do. And I guarantee you that many of them do it better than you do. This was one of those things that, photographers, in my view, need to come to terms with, pretty early on. You have to be your own most aggressive editor. You can't, every picture is not good. That's what my mother always said. We're not doing mothers here. You have to say, these are not good images to make yourself better, right? So how do you separate yourself from the millions of photographers that are out there? It's not on your photographic ability. What I mean by that is there are people who take better pictures than you, who are not getting work. It's about figuring out how to connect with the people you're selling to or you're trying to appear in front of, right? Now, over at ASMP, we do a lot with professionals, right? And so they are often trying to make their career in photography. So we talk about who they're selling to and who your market is. And I guarantee you that the people, the photo buyers, the art buyers, the people who are hiring creatives want to work with someone who has professional knowledge and skill on basic things like contracts and copyright, more than they want the latest hotshot person who has a really great Instagram portfolio, because one of them is so much easier to work with than the other. And so when you're in a world where there's so many photographers, there's so many creators out there, what you have to differentiate yourself on are other skills. Skills like your business skills, skills like your relationship skills, your ability to connect with clients, your ability to make your work appealing in ways beyond what's just on the page.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So that's something that we have to, I like the fact that you say, because especially now, and I'm trying to keep this as how can I say this? As yeah, no, it's not gonna happen. So basically, unfortunately now with social media, you get a lot of fandom. Somebody, You know, as a matter of fact, I mean, it's you can see an increase of photographers through January, February, March, April because they got a camera in December for Christmas. And all of a sudden, you know, you have this influx of all these photographers, you know, that will last maybe till the end of the year, if that. And with that, you know, and unfortunately now with social media, when somebody posts a picture, you have your 100, you know, friends, you know, on Instagram, whatever, say, and it gives you kind of like a false sense of security.
Yeah.
You know, of like, oh, maybe I should, you know, move this. And there's nothing wrong with the fact that, yeah, if you think that this is something for you, go for it. You know, but there's also something that I've always said, you know, and I've always pushed for, which is if you are, you know, really thinking and considering something like this, you can't do it and affect the market itself, which is what happens a lot of the times where you have a lot of these photographers who go in and start charging $50 for a 3-hour session, you know, and stuff like that. So,
well, just building on that, I think two things can be true at once. One, I think there's a lot of photographers who don't properly frame their current skill level. So because they might have inflated sense of how great their pictures are, right? But they also underestimate the power they have, as you said, to move a market. It doesn't take too many photographers who don't have good business practices to make an entire photography market unbalanced. That's one of those things that you know ASMP has always stood for, which is it's not about everyone doing everything, you know, a certain way, but it is about understanding that how you price your work affects 100 other photographers who are working with that client next week and next month and next year. And if you care about your work and you care about photography, you care about visual creation in general, you have to treat what you do with value. And the number one thing I see in not only our members, but every photographer I've worked with now for 30 years is that photographers and videographers and creators undervalue their work. They think that they're not worth as much as they are. They are nervous to ask for what they're worth. And the first question, which I'm sure a lot of people have when they hear that is, well, how do I even know what I'm worth, right? And that's where getting into this community can really help because it's so dependent on what market you're in. And so you bring up some really interesting points that I think we could go down a side trail on for a while, because I think how photographers affect their market based on their business and pricing practices is something that's often overlooked.
Yeah, absolutely. And Rex was actually saying that this applies to content creators so much, especially in the current moment. So, and this, you know, this applies to you know, so young photographers that are coming out, you know, content creators, stuff like that, that you just kind of, you know, are starting off or whatever. You literally have an immense amount of information, you know, out, you know, something that I wish I had when I was, you know, starting off, stuff like that. So take advantage of everything that you know, that it's out there, number one. But two, also learn kind of what stuff, you know, and it kind of segues into the next question that we were, you know, that I was going to ask, which was, you know, what can young photographers learn from copyright battles in the past? So let's talk a little bit about that, about what's something, you know, or what are some of the things that have changed within the last few years when it comes to copyright law that has benefited or will benefit, you know, the current photographers that are starting off now. And then the second one is like, what has changed within the 2 to 3 years that photographers need to understand?
Yeah. Well, first of all, those are wonderful questions because so much has changed, and this is an area that creators generally don't understand, you know, in depth, and then also don't think they need to understand it. And there couldn't be anything further from the truth, right? What I've always said is that the single greatest asset you own are your copyrights. It's not your gear. It's not your studio. It's not any of that other stuff, because what a copyright is the ability for you to create a career off of the content that you make. You know, when we talk about copyright, I often talk about this idea. The whole reason copyright exists is because if you and I are sitting at a coffee shop and I tell you about this great book that I'm writing, and I go into what the plot is, and I've been working on it for 5 years, and it's getting ready to come out next week. And then you go home that night and take everything I wrote and you publish it the day before, that without copyright law, that would be okay. So what copyright law says is the creator gets a limited period of time to monetize their work. Now, after that period of time is over, the work goes into the public domain, which means anyone can use it, right? And right now, the term of copyright is the creator's life plus 70 years. So there are a number of things that are not covered by copyright anymore that were created in the past. And those are free for everyone to use in the public domain. You can't renew copyright. You only get one shot at it, right? But when we talk about what's changed in copyright law, I always like to start with what hasn't changed. And what I mean by that is we are working under the Copyright Act of 1976. That's the most current version. So can we imagine back, I wasn't born yet in 1976, what was going on then that this is the same copyright law we're under. Now it's been amended over the years and they've tried to keep up with technology and everything else. But frankly, they don't do a great job at it because it's the government and it's very hard to get laws passed and you know all the things that we know about. So you have to think about the copyright principles. Those are what we talked about earlier, that you're the only one who can reproduce work and display work and all those. Those are the core elements of copyright. And when we look at what's changed, we look at court cases. And court cases are, if I have to pick one area in the last 10 years where ASMP is kind of the best at, it's in writing amicus briefs for these Supreme Court cases and other court cases. Because what we do is we write these briefs that help explain to the court why one ruling or another would affect creators in a positive way or a negative way. And they're called amicus briefs or friend of the court briefs, right? And most big cases have them, but in the photography and visual creation world, there's not a lot of organizations that write these. And we've written more of them than any other photo trade association in the last few years. And those have resulted in cases that have been very beneficial to creators. There's a great case that was from a few years ago called Unicolors versus H&M. It's a case about fabrics. And you might be thinking, well, that has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. But it's about copyright and who can do what when it comes to copyright registration. The upshot of this case, without going into all the details, is that the Supreme Court said, hey, guess what? If you make a mistake on your copyright application, but you did it in good faith, right? You weren't trying to defraud the government. You just didn't know what the answer was. That's okay. We're going to give you a chance to correct that mistake. This was just a few years ago. Before that, if you made a mistake, the court could throw out your copyright registration and it's like you never owned copyright to begin with if you just didn't know what the law was. So these are the type of cases that we really love to go and focus on. Because what we write there is we say, hey, court, realize that, and I'll just use photographers as an example. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of photographers that want to register their copyrights, that want to be involved in the system, that want to protect their livelihoods. Because if they can't do that, they can't stay in business, right? They can't pay rent next month. And what you're saying to them is they don't get their shot in court because they didn't understand the definition of some legal term that was created in 1976 that is no longer used anymore. And the court said, you know what, you're right. That's not right. And so that's an example of a ruling that came out of some of these court cases. So when we talk about what's changed in copyright law in the recent past, we look at these cases. There's been a number of them that ASMP has been involved in, and a number of them that are just going on every day because copyright affects everyone.
That's awesome. And that actually answers, some of the other questions, that we were about to come up with, about, when it comes to, what are some of the wins that ASMP, has done. Obviously, you mentioned one that even though it had nothing to do with that, you guys were heavily involved in that part. of that. So we all understand that copyright has protected photographers or creatives in general. How does ASMP work with policymakers to shape like legislation and protect some of these artists?
Yeah. So we really break down our advocacy work into judicial advocacy work, which is what I was just talking about with the amicus briefs, where we go into courts and we help them understand how this affects creators, and then our legislative work. And that's where we talk with Congress, right? And so we go up to Washington regularly and meet with different people in the House and the Senate that are in charge of making these laws that deal with copyright issues. And when we have these meetings, you have to understand this is the part that we often talk about how creators are stronger together, right? Standing together makes all creatives stronger. And that's why we want everyone to come into the fold at ASMP. Because when I walk into the office of a senator and I say, you know what, I represent now 7,200 creators, across 71 different countries who are all trying to make their living, working in this area. And this law is unfair because of X, Y, and Z. What you have to realize is that sitting across the room from me is Meta and is Google and are these giant companies with thousands of lawyers. And frankly, ASMP has a couple, you know what I mean? And so it is a fight. It is definitely a David versus Goliath type of fight. But we win more than you might imagine. And the reason we win is we're on the right side of things. We're on the side of small creators who are literally just trying to survive in this world, who want to be able to take pictures or create videos or create content and be able to buy food for their family. And that's a message that resonates with the legislative branch, with the House and with the Senate. Now, it doesn't always work. And right now, as we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, that is a really big uphill battle because you can't imagine the amount of money that is on the other side of the issue from where we sit, from where ASMP and others creators sit. It is every dollar on that side is meant to win for their position, and it's a hard fight right now. And that's where we work with our partners. And we do a lot of work with the Copyright Alliance, for example. They are probably the biggest copyright organization in Washington. I was privileged enough to sit on their board for a few years. And the other people in the Copyright Alliance are Sony and Disney and Fox and these huge companies. But ASMP gets a seat at the table too. And that goes back to our 80-year history of fighting for photographers' rights, for creatives' rights.
That's so, going back into all of this, obviously you guys have a great history and a great track record in being able to be a change for the good for the creatives of where it counts, which is fantastic. So when you kind of look at it, and I'm going to talk to you like on creators and stuff like that. If you're currently either starting, you've been in the industry for a while, to have somebody like that on your corner, it's don't ever. One of the things I always say is, don't ever see these types of memberships. This is a necessity, especially if you are a creative or a creator. This is something that you need to have. This is an investment for you because it's something, at least now you have someone in your corner. And trust me, from someone who was not a member of a lot of, for different reasons or whatever, and I got, a lot of my work ripped off, that was my own fault when it came to it. But to have, to be able to have a membership, look at it as an investment when it comes, to these situations. Do you have, I don't know, like off the top of your head, do you have like a real success story where kind of ASMP or being a member of ASMP kind of, help someone reclaim ownership or payment, for the work or something?
Yeah. So we get to hear about these stories every week because one of the things that ASMP does that no other visual association does is every Tuesday we have our members' legal clinic where every member can come in for 15 minutes, get on a Zoom with me, and we'll talk about your business or legal issues one-on-one. No one else is doing that. But every week I get to talk to members who have come to us with issues. Someone stole my work, this has happened, that's happened. How do I move forward? And we help them move forward in those meetings. And then often they'll come back and they'll say, hey, that worked. And I was able to get that contract, I was able to get that deal. But the story, which is makes us so happy, right? Because that's the whole point of what we do, is to help creators do what they do best, which is create, right? We don't want you to be lawyers. Let us be lawyers. You be the creator, and we'll just help guide you on the path. But the one I wanted to mention is a very long-time ASMP member, and her name is Lynn Goldsmith. Lynn Goldsmith is a very famous music photographer. And if that name sounds familiar at all, it's because there was a recent Supreme Court case called Goldsmith versus the Andy Warhol Foundation. And Lynn Goldsmith, in a nutshell, Lynn Goldsmith had taken a picture of the musical artist Prince back right before the Purple Rain tour. And it was from Lynn Goldsmith's pictures that Andy Warhol created a series of 13 different works that essentially copied Lynn Goldsmith's work. And we got involved in this case very, very early on because we're like, look, you can't just take work because you're named Andy Warhol and take a photograph and then sell it, and then all of a sudden it's yours. And this went up and down the courts for about 5 years' time before the Supreme Court said, you know what, you're right. That for something to fall under what we call fair use law, it has to be actually transformative. It has to be more than just merely a shift. That was a really important piece of law that came out just a couple of years back. And Lynn Goldsmith, as ASMP was the only organization that stood with Lynn from the beginning on that. And I'm privileged to call Lynn a friend because she's a great example of an ASMP member that has been able to work with us for decades now. And if you haven't checked out her work, go check out lynngoldsmith.com because she's an amazing music photographer.
That's awesome. See, so again, guys, this is something and someone that's going to stand on your corner. And this is by no means a commercial or anything. It's just something that, that I firmly and highly believe in as a creator myself. I would like, but Geekoto, one of the reasons why we are part, and partnering up with ASMP, it's because of this. It's because they are, in my opinion, the right side of and do a little bit more than a lot of the other organizations that are out there, currently when it comes to this. So, currently right now, we're going to move on to, kind of like legal protections, in current years. Like how protected do you think the average creator is legally at this moment? Let's say that is not a member, just in general.
Yeah. So I'll answer that in two ways. Every creator has more copyright protections than they realize because they don't even realize they own as many copyrights as they do. Every single one of us owns hundreds of thousands or millions of copyrights. Every time you doodle a sketch on a notepad, you own a copyright in that sketch when you're done with it. Every time you snap that shutter, you own a copyright in that work when you're done with it. And the fact that if we asked 100 creators, how many copyrights do you own? Then it'd say, well, none. I haven't paid. I haven't told the government. I haven't registered. I haven't done that. None of that matters. And so when we ask how protected are creators, I think the bigger question to ask is, how much protections do creators have that they don't even know they have, right? So let's start there. There's a lot of protections there. Now, the second way to answer that question is, it is open season on creatives out there in the world. There are very few populations that are more taken advantage of than visual creators, and now we talk about, everything from painters and sculptors and muralists and graffiti artists to photographers and videographers. Across the gamut, what we see is a population of creative individuals who do not generally want to dive into the X's and O's of how these contracts are put together. And so what happens is they get their first shot working for a client. They get their first shot dealing with these issues, and they get taken advantage of left and right. half the time they don't even realize it because they've never seen another contract to compare it to, or they've been dealing with their own bad contracts for years, right? And that is the type of preying on individuals that is, I think everyone should say is not a good thing,
Yeah.
But what the place I encourage all creatives to start is in the fact that you own copyright in the work that you already have. And you don't have to do anything to own those rights. You have them. And, rights are they're not these kind of blow away in the wind kind of things. They're important. And there's a reason why copyright law is not in an amendment to the Constitution. It's in the actual document. It's in the core text of the Constitution, the Copyright Clause, because copyright was important to the progress and the founding of this country from the first day on. It was very evident that if you couldn't make a career off of the creative work that you produce, that everyone is poorer for it. Society is poorer for it. This country is poorer for it. And that's why copyright has always held such an important place in American law. That is my diatribe on protection. So there you go.
So one thing that we've learned, and this is something, again, now I know this, but back when I got started, it was something that just because I took a picture, I did not know that I was protected because of the laws. But this also comes because of laws that have happened in the past of different things and of organizations like ASMP that fought for those rights for yourself. So again, it's good to be part of something, and obviously because ASMP is here and get you a membership, get you something like that that's gonna benefit you. Again, this is gonna be an investment towards you. If you're a creative, it's something that you not necessarily just should have, but you need to have. If you're truly looking into this being part of your business, make sure that you're protected. So having someone on your side, it's always going to be a win on you. So that's great to hear that a lot of people don't know that once you're done with the work that you created, you already have that protection, that you don't have to send $15 to the government, to get a piece of paper that says something. Which I think is more than $15 now. But that's great. So now, on the other hand, do you still think that there are copyright laws or copyright protections that fall short?
Yeah, there are a number, and they're always under attack. It's as an organization that promotes robust copyright protection. There are other organizations that are exactly opposite of us. You may have heard on the internet this idea of the copyleft movement, which essentially says that all work is free to take at any time, right? We fundamentally disagree with those views. And so, but those views exist. And there are constant fights over this. And some of these fights make sense. And what I mean by that is, as a client, if I'm hiring a photographer, I, as the client, might not understand licensing. I might not understand the way things are done in the industry, and more importantly, why they're done that way. And so part of what I think all creators have to do is know enough about the law and about the work that they do to be able to help teach their clients so that their clients move in the right direction as well. And that's an important responsibility, right? There are areas of copyright law that, as I mentioned, were under the Copyright Act of 1976 that have not kept up with technology, period. I mean, look, let's just mention AI. Copyright law has no answer to a lot of the stuff that's going on with AI. And one of the things that we really focus on is trying to help provide those answers so that courts and the Copyright Office and other groups can say, okay, yeah, that makes sense. This is how it fits into our current existing framework of copyright law. But new technology is always going to outpace the laws, right? So what you have to be looking at is kind of the fundamental protections that you have and how you can use the laws that exist to help benefit you. And another example of something which I think, we've been real proud of is there exists something now in Washington called the Copyright Claims Board, the CCB. And this is essentially copyright small claims court. If someone stole your work and they use it in one or two places, and it's like, maybe a $500,000, $2,500 kind of infringement, you can virtually go to this new tribunal that was just set up within the last 3 years and have a number of people on this tribunal who are experts in copyright law tell the other person, yeah, you infringed. You need to stop doing that and pay the guy $500. Right now, to go to federal court and pursue a copyright claim is more than $250,000, period. Just to go and do it. It normally lasts about 3 years is how long that takes. And you have to pay lawyers that whole time. So one of the things that we and many of our sister associations fought for almost a decade was this thing called the CASE Act. And the CASE Act was the Copyright Small Claims Court, and the CCB came out of that. And you can go to ccb.gov and see this court, because you don't have to be a member of anything. It applies to everyone who owns a copyright. And the reason this was so important is because for so long, even if someone stole your work and you had copyright protection, you really didn't, because you didn't have the money to go to court for 3 years and spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so it was kind of like this illusory protection that you had. Getting things together like the CCB and having something where creators can go and say, you know what, this might not be a $100,000 case, but it really affects me. And it's a couple $1,000, whatever it is. Having a place for them to go and fight for their rights is just as important. And so, what we talk about regularly is there are lots of creators out there. I mentioned a few earlier, like Disney and Fox and ABC and these giant companies. They're also creators. They also benefit from copyright law. But the ones we care about, the ones we focus on, are the small creators, the individuals, the 2, 3, 10-person companies that are out there just trying to stay in business. Copyright law may apply to all of us together, but the small creators are the ones that we're focused on. That's why things like the CCB are so important.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's great. So I'm gonna change it a little bit. So obviously we know what the work and their people are protected. What about ideas?
Yeah.
Let's say does that very perfect example right now. I'm not going to mention any names of an individual who has this style of kind of like a boutique creative conference, right? Who, when one of the invited speakers after the thing went off and stole that idea and went and started its own. So ideas or stuff like that, is that protected? Because this happens all the time. This happens, constantly. I know of photographers who have an idea, who start something, whether it's a new business or a new way of doing things, and then somebody else grabs that idea and starts it somewhere else.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer this in the most lawyerly way possible by saying, no, copyright does not protect ideas, but let me talk a little bit about this.
Yeah.
Because copyright protects the expression of ideas. The work that is protected by copyright has to be fixed in a tangible form, is what the Copyright Office says, what the copyright law says. And so for photographers, we say that's when you snap the shutter. For artists, that's, when they put the paint on the canvas, all that kind of stuff, right? But ideas themselves are not copyrightable. It's only the expression of those ideas. Something that most people don't think about is that choreography is something you can have copyrighted, get a copyright on. But how do you do that? It has to be a tangible expression of ideas. And that is, you have to either film it being performed, or you have to write out the steps that are part of the choreography. As soon as you do that, it's now protected.
Oh, okay.
But before that, it's not. And another good example of that, and one that I think some people think about sometimes, and I've certainly thought about this, is if I'm giving a talk to a room and no one's recording it and no one's doing anything like that, I don't own a copyright in the words I'm saying, because it's not fixed in a tangible form, right? And so because of that, I can't stop someone from writing down all the words I'm saying and then going and saying it themselves the next day. So copyright doesn't protect ideas. However, it is super important that you are careful with the ideas that you have and making sure that if you are going to be talking very freely about these ideas, that you have done the work to protect yourself by maybe, writing these things down and making them, giving yourself a little bit of leverage. Because at the end of the day, copyright law is not going to be what saves you there. There are other areas of law which could, but it's not going to be copyright and intellectual property law. You generally have to have something in a tangible form. Now, and sorry, I know I talk a while. That's part of what they pay me for. So the other thing I'll talk about now is something which often gets confused with copyright, and that's trademark law. Trademark law is entirely different. So copyright law is meant to protect a creator's expression of their creativity. Trademark law is meant to prevent consumer confusion. So if I'm a chef and I want to open a restaurant and my name is Tom McDonald, I can't call my restaurant McDonald's. That's my name and this is what I do, and it seems like I should be able to. But if I open up a restaurant called McDonald's, there's a chance that the consumer might be confused whether it's this McDonald's or the other McDonald's, right? That's what trademark law is about. And a lot of people think trademark law is meant to protect creators. It's not. It has nothing to do with you. Copyright law is the one that protects creators. What trademark law protects is the ability for you to have a brand which others can't glom off of or build off of, right? Okay. And so trademark's also very important for creators, but it is something that is more expensive to obtain. And we've talked about how everyone just owns a copyright the minute they create the work. Not true with trademarks. Requires a lot more effort to get, but there is value in it.
Okay. So, the bottom line when it comes to stuff like this, guys, you understand that if you have ideas and stuff like that, be very careful who you share them with, because there are unfortunately, a lot of scumbags out there that would definitely take those and run away with them, especially if you're newer or even if you're not, but somebody else thinks they can get away with it or have gotten away with a lot of things in the past, they'll continue to do it. So be very, very careful, with your ideas on what you do, protect yourself, and make sure that you have someone in your corner that's going to be looking out for you, in those.
I'm just going to build on that for a quick second and say that the phrase that I've said, and so before I was at ASMP, I had a law firm in Dallas that focused on art law. So artists, collectors, museums, galleries, those type of groups, and a lot of photographers, obviously. And the thing that I said more than any other line to my clients, and now I say at ASMP, is not every wrong has a legal remedy. People steal stuff all the time. People do bad things. The whole reason lawyers exist is because people didn't do what they said they were going to do, right? And not every wrong can be corrected legally. And so most of the time when someone comes with a problem, the end result is, you know what? That really sucks. Do better next time. Learn from this, because it's not worth the time, the energy, the aggravation to go chase this down. You have to consider what's going to allow you to sleep better at night, right? Is it always being angry about people who have stolen your work, or is it understanding how to prevent that from happening?
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, there's so many I almost feel like gray areas, when it comes to this stuff like this, that when you're just starting off, or even as a professional, it takes one of those things that it's hard. It's hard on top of everything that you have to do, on top of, running your own business and having your accounts and having your clients and having your customers and all that stuff. It's something that needs to happen. So it's one of those things that again, protect yourself, as much as you can when it comes, to this situation. So right now, with what are three things that you think creatives should do when let's say when they find their work stolen?
Yeah.
What are the three things, and then building on that, do you think that, having a stronger contract will protect them, in these cases?
Yeah. So I'll answer the last part first and then go back to those three things. Having a stronger contract is great, but having a contract at all is better. And the vast majority of photographers and videographers, and especially content creators that are out there that have no contracts at all, is mind-boggling. When we were at the law firm, the art market is the largest unregulated market in the world. Things are, $1 million deals are sold done on handshakes, right? Nowhere else is that banking, that doesn't happen, and business that just doesn't happen. But creatives are almost like naturally adverse to writing contracts or dealing with contracts, and someone hands them a contract and they're like, what do I do with this? That's how I was. When I was a photographer, long before I ever went to law school, I was like, okay, I'll just sign whatever someone puts in front of me. You're going to pay me something? Great. Sounds wonderful, right? So, yes, contracts are important, but have one to begin with. That's a good place to start. Now, what are the three things you can do? I think the first thing you can do is evaluate the situation and determine how much time and effort and energy do you want to expend on. And I'll go back to that example of, sometimes I'd have a client come in and they'd say, look, this locally owned mom and pop restaurant down the street saw one of my images of the city online and they put it on their website and I want to sue them. Okay, maybe that's not the right, maybe that's not the right first step. Could you? Yes, you could, because copyright law protects you. But more importantly, what you might do is reach out and say, you know what? Hey, I bet you didn't know this, but I would normally license this for like $150 for the interior use on a website one time, that kind of thing. If we pay that, we can be done with it. That's a resolution. When you find your work stolen somewhere, first identify what the resolution will be. Now I'll go to the other side. There's a case that's going on right now, and it's a case that we care about. It's a case that we care about in a lot of different ways, and this has actually divided the art community. And I don't even know how many of the people listening will think about this. There's a photographer, ASMP member, longtime friend of the organization, named Jeff Sedlick. Jeff Sedlick's out of California. Jeff Sedlick took a very famous picture of Miles Davis. And by the way, this case is still in court right now, and it's being argued on Monday in Pasadena at the appeals court in California. And Jeff Sedlick took this very famous picture of Miles Davis. Kat Von D, the tattoo artist, took this picture and traced it and made a tattoo of it. And Jeff Sedlick said, look, you can't do that with my photograph. And there was actually Instagram video from the tattoo parlor where Kat Von D is tracing on a light box the image onto a stencil, which was tattooed. And so this whole case revolves around the idea of, is this something that you should be able to do? Now, this one's tricky. And the reason I say it's tricky is because tattoo artists are in that world of visual creators, right? Those are creative individuals who are making work, and they should have copyright protections and everything else. But the question is, can you do what she did with the photograph? Now, our argument is no. We've written an amicus brief in this case. We don't know what the court's going to come up with. We don't have the final resolution to this. But my point is, if it's a mom and pop restaurant using one photo on an interior webpage, that should get one level of attention from you. And if it's an international superstar tattoo artist using your work that's seen by millions of people, that gets a different level of attention. And so one of the first things you should do when someone has stolen your work is figure out how much time and energy you want to expend and what a good resolution looks like for you. Sometimes a resolution is simply having your name used as credit. Now, credit is something that it should not ever be a first stop, because how many artists have been taken advantage of? Oh, I'll give you credit on that, or that's just bullshit. We don't support that at all. But what we do support is, hey, you liked my work enough to use it, and you didn't even understand this copyright law. I want you to continue to use it. And so why don't we make a deal? Why don't you just say, this is where I found it from, and then maybe, we'll throw something else into the mix to make it a fair deal. But you have to be thinking about creative ways to get to resolution. The last thing you should want to do is fight. What you should want to do is resolve these things so you can get back to doing what you do, which is creating new work. And so figuring out how to get to a resolution is probably the most important part of what to do.
Okay. Yeah, which is, I mean, again, one of the things as creators that you cannot waste a lot of your time in is to be kept away from what you do, which is what you were talking about, which is fantastic. And something like this happened earlier with Shepard Fairey and the Obama poster, right? Something like that, something very similar to that, which was from a photograph.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. And we see this in the art world, and there's a whole argument of appropriation artists. The Lynn Goldsmith versus Andy Warhol case goes into this. Richard Prince is probably the most famous appropriation artist out of New York. And a lot of these are in those gray areas, right? Because as a society, we want to support people using existing copyrighted works to create new work. That's good for everyone. What's not good for everyone is simply stealing work. And where you draw that line is sometimes really difficult, right? When we think about the different ways that creators can protect themselves, it reminds me of something that is one of the most popular parts of our website, and that's our document library. Because we're just talking about contracts. How many creatives have never written a contract and don't even know the basics of contracts? And so in our document library, there are 26 different templates of contracts and documents that cover all these different areas. And at this point, we've replaced all of them. So I've written all of them. And if we were still back at my law firm, it would have cost like $25,000 to hire me to write all these things up. And they're all free for members there. That's one of those things that by sharing knowledge and sharing in this community, everyone becomes better at business, which helps everyone, right? Everyone benefits when creators understand their rights and how to protect their business.
So again, investment, guys. As part of the investment, this is something that it's not necessarily that you might need, that you need. You need to have this as a creative, as a photographer, as an individual. This is something, that it's going to help you, and it's going to pay for itself when it comes to, trust me, I hired a lawyer when I got my contract done. I paid thousands of dollars to get it done. It was fantastic. It was great. But again, at that time, I wasn't a member, and the member or the organizations that I was a member of did not offer any of this stuff. So be very, very picky on the organizations that you're dealing with, that you are part of, and stuff like that, and see what the benefits that they have, in those situations. So
and I want to build on something you were saying earlier, and that is there is an incredible benefit to the fact that there's so much information out there right now. And when we look at, frankly, the beneficial parts of AI, the parts that don't steal images, right? The chat GPTs of the world, those have a place in a photographer's business too. Okay.
Well, yeah.
But there is so much information out there that you can't trust and you can't rely on, and it's incredibly hard to figure out what that is. It is an information overload kind of situation. If you type into Google, show me the best photographer's contract, you'll get 30 different contracts. Very few of them may even apply to the state you're in, or they may even take into account the type of work that you do, right? And so you have to be critical of where your sources of information are coming. And that's one of those things that sometimes at ASMP, we will not be at the very leading edge of something because we want to make sure we get it right. Because we know that creators and others are looking towards ASMP to figure out, how we should approach these things. And you have to be cautious when you do that. And you have to be cautious with what you find online because, we've already started seeing AI generated contracts that do not hold up in court, that do not hold up when something's challenged. And the most useless thing in the world is a contract that when you actually need it doesn't mean anything. Then you've wasted time and money and energy on nothing.
Yeah, that's great. And it's actually a perfect segue because we're going to be getting into the nitty gritty of what AI is. Actually, this morning when I was, before I got in, I get to the office and I try to, get work done from that I was left from the day before, but I try to see what's kind of going on. And obviously now with like the Geekoto gamers aspect of it, which we do a lot of things for content creators and stuff like that, I try to keep up with stuff that's going on. One thing that is currently going on right now is, for example, AI is mimicking, with our work and stuff like that. And one of the big things that came out, I want to say that it was through ChatGPT, that you can actually just kind of give it prompts now, and it'll actually do illustrations. And for example, like Studio Ghibli, it's massive ones where they're literally giving full scenes from this prompt, and they are illustrated in that style. So it's scary. It really is kind of scary because, one of the things that I started seeing, I was like, well, okay, so it's the AI like absorbing all of these scenes and just kind of recreating and regurgitating it with a few changes, or is it coming out with new ones? But like how? So I guess what I'm kind of going to is like the AI and with the copyright law when it comes to stuff like this, when you put your work into, like you were saying with contracts looking for AI, or when you nowadays that you're like, oh, show me a picture or whatever, and we'll either illustrate it or recreate something like that. How do you see that kind of going?
Yeah, we are at the beginning of just an incredibly long process with AI. What you mentioned about illustrations is concerning, and from our perspective, it's concerning because you are taking away the literal humanity of a creative work out of the work itself, and it's a fight that I think a lot of us didn't think we'd ever have to fight, even just a few years ago. And so, one of the first things that we think is incredibly important with AI is that there's transparency over how works were created. If works are created using generative AI tools, it should be labeled as such. You should know that. You should have the right as an individual in the world to determine whether you want to have works that have been created with generative AI or not. The example that I always think about is when I go to the grocery store, I can buy a banana or I can buy one that's an organic banana right next door, and it has a sticker on it and it costs a little bit more. And that's okay because that matters as a consumer. So I think you will see, and ASMP has supported labeling and transparency, including, the labeling of human generated works, right? Which again is a phrase never thought we'd be saying, or, that we'd even have to say. So it's important, though, that you're honest. First of all, it's important that everyone's honest. And so we fight for legislation on things like, transparency and labeling and naming. But it's important that you're honest as a creator with the people you're working with. And this is where I am 100% sure that, and I'll just use photographers now, are not thinking of the implications here. Because many photographers are using generative AI tools, even if they don't know they're using it, in things like Photoshop and others, in other places. And what the Copyright Office has said is that generative AI works are not eligible for copyright protection. Period. Stop.
Oh, okay.
Now, what that means is that if I take a photograph and I use generative AI to strip in a sky, I can get copyright protection on the part of the photograph that's not generative AI. But I can't get copyright protection on the whole image because it includes generative AI works. If this sounds confusing, it is, and it's a mess right now. And so we're working on trying to make it simpler with the Copyright Office. But here's the bigger problem. Many photographers will go be hired by companies, big or small companies. And if those photographers are using generative AI tools and they're providing to a company an image and they're saying, yeah, you can use this for your next ad campaign, that company doesn't actually own a copyright in the parts of the image that were created using generative AI. That is a recipe for a photographer getting sued, because some company is going to use that, some other company is going to steal it and find out that they didn't own the underlying, rights to the photograph, right? That is, I guarantee that no one is thinking about this except for us and a few other people, because what we want is for photographers not to get sued, right? But photographers need to be transparent with their clients about when they're using generative AI tools. And it's not always a bad thing. So many of our members use generative AI tools in different aspects of their work. For example, working with working with some Fortune 500 on some international ad campaign, they will use generative AI tools in the storyboarding period, in the development, in the concept period. And that is actually an incredible tool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right? And so you can't say, and we don't say AI is bad. All AI does, is all these bad things, because there are ways to work it into the work that you do. And we see many of our members doing that each and every day. But have a code of ethics with yourself as a creator, that you're transparent with everyone you deal with about how your works are made. That's really important.
No, absolutely. And that's one of the things I think that a lot of photographers are missing. And this is something that, in my opinion, it's not something that just kind of happens now. It started happening when post-production tools got easier, where I was like, instead of getting images right on camera, they were like, well, I'll fix it in post. I'll fix it in post. And it's kind of getting to the point now where, like you were saying, but now that is now becoming a tricky situation.
Yeah.
To, which me, who I love, I'm a purist when it comes to it, like get stuff right on camera.
Yeah.
Lighting, it's fantastic, and stuff like that. It always kind of helps. So you don't have to do stuff like that later. So again, guys, now these are things. This is even something that I didn't even know, which is great to know. So be careful. Be careful. Obviously, now that if you are using stuff like that, be honest with your clients and stuff like that, because apparently now you can own half of the image. When it kind of comes down to it.
And look, so the rules here are changing every day. And so, a question we get a lot is, okay, well, how much of an image needs to be created using generative AI before I have to disclose that to the Copyright Office? And the Copyright Office's answer to that is some amount, right? There's no amount. There's just just whatever kind of makes sense to the examiner who's looking at it, which doesn't help anyone, right? And so we're working on trying to get the right guidance from the Copyright Office to help creators understand where these limitations are. But it is important to understand that the Copyright Office has been pretty clear that works that are created solely using generative AI prompts and from generative AI platforms are not eligible for copyright protection. And if part of your image is created using those tools, you have to identify that and explain it to the Copyright Office when you're registering your work in order to get a registration, which is something that, will just be blunt, no one is doing.
Yeah.
There are very few photographers who register their copyrights to begin with. And there's even fewer that would pay attention to something like that. Right.
And this is something that right now, which is funny with content creators. Right now, you've got virtual content creators now, which they're completely AI, and some that are making a lot of money, with stuff like that. So this is, it's something that that we all have to kind of think about and make sure that we know. If you are using AI, be honest. Like what Tom was saying. Be honest on the stuff that you're doing and stuff like that, because that stuff can backfire on you, especially now with so many companies moving and adding more and more AI. Some friends of ours, they're not necessarily replacing things. Like with some others, where they're not generating stuff. Out of prompts and stuff like that. But things like that are going to change. So make sure that when you are creating your work, when you are doing stuff like that, that you are protected, and stuff, and disclose it. There's nothing wrong with using new tools. I remember when I was, when I was doing stuff, fashion stuff and stuff like that, that I had to either sketch stuff or I had to get, things from magazines to put ideas to make, boards and all that stuff. And nowadays it's so much easier. You can definitely use that and coexist with AI. And I think that's a great, great tool, like you were mentioning earlier, so use stuff like that. But, to create the final work, that seems like it's kind of, a messy situation, at the moment. So yeah, I think you kind of you actually you touched on this, so ASMP, you guys are definitely not against AI. Your stance with it seems like, as long as you're ethical with what you're doing, you're good. So you're not an anti AI.
So again, at the risk of just talking forever, because AI is something, I enjoy talking about. There are parts of AI that we are 100% against. And so let me mention what some of those are. I'll go back to what we started with, which is AI ingestion of materials for training purposes. And this is where, the AI companies feed and scrape the web and get images or books or whatever it is. And that's how these models are trained, right? We view that categorically as theft. And that is a violation of copyright law. There's no way to be ethical and do that. Now, what the AI companies are saying is that falls under that provision of the copyright law called fair use. And we could not disagree with that more. This is something that is just now being litigated in courts, and rulings are starting to come out, including just a couple weeks ago, with some rulings that are incredibly concerning to us, and cases that we're going to be writing amicus briefs in as they go up to appeals, because some courts have found that might be fair use. If that were the case, that would give a rubber stamp approval to just stealing work online. And it would be so incredibly bad for creators, it's hard to overstate that part. So what are we categorically against? AI ingestion without approval from the creators or compensation to the creators, period. That's one. The output is something a little bit different. That's where we're talking about ways to use AI tools, and you get something that comes out from the other end. As long as you're ethical and you disclose how you got to that output, I think there's a lot of ways that creators can use those positively. And one thing about, creators who are out there who might have fully generative AI platforms, whether it's YouTube Shorts, we see that a lot, fully generative. We're not saying that even this is a bad thing. What we are saying is that, one thing, realize that you can't get any copyright protection on that. If you create a fully generative AI work and I see it, I can take it and put it up myself on my own channel, and you really can't do anything about it, period. I mean, so those are the risks that you take when you don't have copyright protections. But we always split up AI into those two halves, the ingestion and training part and the output part. And those should be treated very differently.
Okay. All right. So are there specific companies that you guys are actively kind of challenging or monitoring that are doing stuff like this?
Yes. They're the same ones that we all hear about, OpenAI and Meta and others. And now this is where the money comes into play, because we can't sue, Meta or many of these companies that are out there, but there are companies who can. So there's a very big court case that's going on in the UK right now with Getty Images. Of course, Getty is giant. We all feel different ways about Getty. But Getty is actually fighting a good fight for creators, because what they're saying is, hey, AI companies, you came and scraped every image from the Getty website and you're not allowed to do that. ASMP is very supportive of Getty in this particular instance, right? Because those are things that we care about as well. So the way that ASMP operates in this world is by identifying places where our voice can add to a conversation and not be drowned out, right? And so we do that in the ways that we talked about a little bit earlier. But we're keeping a close eye on court cases. We're keeping a close eye on these companies. And we've made outreach to these companies to say, hey, we'd love to talk with you on behalf of photographers and visual creators about how this is affecting, that. Surprisingly, my phone isn't ringing off the hook from OpenAI at the moment, but I'd love to talk with Sam Altman if he wants.
All right, Sam Altman, we're calling you out. He's never going to see this, but again. But no, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, that's good. I mean, at least you have somebody, on your side that's going to be, looking out for you. And this is something that I've been stressing through this entire thing. You guys already know that there's plenty of protections out there, for your work and stuff like that, and when you were saying, technically right now, it's kind of a mess of all of these companies that are scraping the internet. And there's a current fight with Getty Images, which is something, which was what the following question was about. In the current kind of landscape, with that, are licensing models changing, according to kind of what's going on with the AI? I mean, I know you were talking about, obviously, if an image is 50% AI and the 50%, real, like, how does that work? How do licenses are going to work, in those situations?
Yeah. So licensing has always been and remains very specific to the type of work that you do, right? And so for our commercial photographers, they have worked for many years under, a rights managed type of licensing where the price of the usage license is based on how the work is used. So if it's used in a magazine as a circulation of 1,000, that's a different price. And if it's used on a billboard, that's on every major highway in the U.S., right? And there are other areas of photography where a more royalty-free model of licensing is used. A client may hire a photographer to create a library of images where they don't have to pay the photographer every time they use a certain image. Right. And there's some areas of photography, for example, that that's common practice. Right. All that being said, what we're seeing with licensing is that licenses are just now beginning to incorporate AI clauses and terms at all. The first one that we're going to be releasing pretty soon is an anti-AI training clause to put in your contracts and your license, which essentially says, hey, I'm glad we're working on this together. Be advised, you can't use the images we create for this to train AI models, because it's not only the giant AI companies we're worried about, people can have local AI models. And so imagine a client who hires you to photograph a set of products, and they hire you once and now they don't have to hire you again in the next 20 years because they've created a model based on your works. And so the first clauses we're coming out with say, hey, that's not okay. You have to call us back on. The second set of clauses that we're thinking about, and the ones that are just beginning to appear, are AI related clauses that have to do with how work can be used by the client in general. So, I had a really interesting question, and this goes outside of even visual creators. And it came from a photographer here in Dallas, who called and said, hey, I have a client and I do a lot of corporate work for them where they, have me hire models and whatnot and talent to be in the shot. And the client asked me the question, if I use AI to change the faces of the images that you give me, does that mean I never have to pay another fee to the talent agency? And that was a question that I had never thought of before, frankly, and is really concerning. Really concerning, just as the underlying principle is how to use AI in a way that devalues the work of the creatives who are involved, whether that's models or talent or whether that's the photographers themselves. And the photographer was asking, one, is that legal? And two, what do I even say if a client asks me to do that? That's where this next set of clauses would come in your contracts and usage licenses, where you say, look, if you want to use this as part of a component of AI generated works in the future, fine. but it costs this premium. It's kind of the difference between a copyright buyout and just like a universal license, a perpetual license, right? And so we're just starting to see those as well. Now, we're not quite ready to release that one yet, because we're talking with our members and we're saying, what makes sense to you? What makes sense in the type of work that you do? Because this is definitely not one size fits all. And the other thing, as I mentioned before, and I'm sure you've mentioned 100 times, is that these things are changing every week.
Yeah.
We don't want to put something out that we have to change next week.
Exactly. And which is, I think, the difficult part with this, the fact that, because things change daily, I can only imagine. Now, obviously we've discussed about, having, the benefits of investing and having memberships, in different, ASMP, or whichever one that, that you guys want to join that has protections. But let's see, for people who are not ready to kind of pull it, are there like platforms that you recommend, so just, for people to manage like copyright and licensing, and stuff like that are, obviously that's included within the ASMP and stuff like that. But let's say, for example, somebody who's just kind of getting started, who would want to do something like that.
Well, first let me mention this. So we do a lot of stuff at ASMP that is open to everyone. A good example is we have a town hall coming up on July 17th. So just in a couple weeks here. You can go on our website, you can register for that. You don't need to be a member. And what we're talking about is AI and advocacy. So probably some of the stuff we're talking about today. You can always check that kind of stuff out. And so there are a lot of resources on our website that are completely open to everyone. You don't have to be a member for that. There are different groups out there that help make the registration process and other processes easier on the copyright side and the licensing side. And one of those, you are a wonderful corporate member of ours. We have another great company we work with called RightsClick. And RightsClick, the way I always describe RightsClick is it's like Lightroom for your copyright registration. You just put in your basic info and they kind of do the rest, and it costs very little. And, if you're a member of ASMP, you get this huge discount on it. But even if you're not, it's not prohibitively expensive. It's a really good way if you've never done a copyright registration before and you're like, I don't even know where to go to get started. Check out RightsClick. It's rightsclick.com, how it sounds. But they're a good group that's out there. And there are a number of others as well. I would say, though, that if you wanted to get a crash course in some of this stuff, go to ASMP, go to our article section, and just type in whatever topic you have on your mind. And I promise I've written articles about it, and they're free, and everyone can. So there's a wealth of information.
So again, guys, here's one of the things and one of the reasons why we love the collaboration that we're doing with ASMP is because of situations like this. Because they've been, their track record speaks for itself, number one. But number two, they've always been very, very open. And, those are the type, if Geekoto, those are the type of companies that we like to pair up with, because we want to make sure that we bring the best bang for your buck, I guess, for lack of a better term, number one. But number two, also that things need to change. Things need to change. They have been stagnant for a very, very long time. And companies, and organizations like this, have to kind of take a step to be able to make that change kind of happen. So this is where kind of call to action kind of comes in, like ASMP, they have local chapters and stuff like that. Look around your areas to see when, either get-togethers and stuff like that, whether it's ASMP or other, or other groups and stuff like that have the same thing. Donate. When there are some calls, there are some organizations that help and stuff like this. Or again, an investment in a membership is always going to be very beneficial to you but you have to get involved. If you want things to change, you have to get involved, in these situations. There's the only times the only thing that is really going to change things for creators, for the industry, itself. We're in a, creative industry. One of the things that we lack is the fact that the most creative people are terrible business people. That's a given. Trust me, I know that. Absolutely know that. And you have to be able to learn, to be better and stuff like that. And when you have somebody that that looks out for you, it's going to make it 10 times easier when it comes to it. So we know that you guys have fought hard for a lot of creators, for everything that's kind of going on. Is there anything that you want to add? We've been talking for a long time. Again, guys, if you guys have any questions or anything, we're nearing the end of our podcast today. But if you have any questions, you still have some time. Please put them on the thing, and we'll get Tom here to listen. How can creators push the kind of like the industry a little bit more? In your opinion?
Yeah, I some of this sounds in the current moment sounds like it might not do a lot, but there is value in reaching out to your local congressman, your local senator, and making your opinion known on some of these issues. When we go to Washington and we walk into these offices and we say, you know what, we represent 7,200 creators who are dealing with this. That's 7,200 people who are trying to make a living doing what they love to do. And what you're thinking about negatively affects them in these ways, X, Y, and Z. And it makes it human and it makes it real. But it only can occur if you're willing to be part of that group. So whether you're part of ASMP or not, reach out. There's a really great, and I'll give you one example of this. If you go to the Copyright Alliance website, copyrightalliance.org, last Tuesday, they started an AI advocacy letter writing campaign where you can just go online, anyone for free. You don't have to be a member or anything. And it will generate for you a letter that will be sent to your local representatives. And you can do it right there on the website. And it helps small creators get their voice heard. You can do that through groups like ours. You can do that on your own. And you can do that through groups like the Copyright Alliance. And we're incredibly supportive of all of those things. But really at the end of the day, what I want creators to understand is that you're not in a situation where you just have to take what people want to give you. And the example I always use on this is I go back to contracts. When I was a photographer before I ever thought about law school, I remember getting a contract and I didn't even know that I could cross out part of that contract and hand it back and be in a negotiation. I just thought that a contract was a contract, right? That it was how it is. And, the other side of the table where they all looked real professional and I didn't. And so I was intimidated by the whole process. And I think it's important for creators to understand that it's not just in contracts, but it's in every part of your life that you have agency and you have the ability to push back on things that aren't right and fight for things that are right. And so I think that's something that every creative can take to heart and use as a good reminder.
That's, again, guys, that's golden advice. I mean, that's stuff that, that it has taken, a lot of us years to understand and to learn and, for that stuff. So, piece of advice from here, make sure that you guys are protected. Make sure you protect your work. Just from the beginning that once that work is created, it's yours. You are protected. I'm like me when I was ignorant to the fact that I thought I had to register it, but at least you have some sort of protection from when you finish that work. When it comes to that, so one of the things that you need to understand is that protection goes a long way. AI is coming for a lot of these things, but there are some things, with organizations like ASMP and stuff like that are trying to move, the needle, to the right, to the side that is going to protect, creatives a little bit more. We don't have any questions. As a matter of fact, some people said Tom has answered questions I didn't even have. This has been great. So great to hear that.
Thank you.
Great to hear that
I
stuff.
find that if I talk long enough, that happens.
No,
from time to
absolutely,
time,
which is great because there's stuff that actually questions that I did have written down that we went right down the line, didn't even have to ask, which was fantastic. So, now with a lot of you did kind of throw a lot of websites and stuff like that. So we'll get those later on and we'll put them here on the video, guys, and that way they'll be linked up. Including ASMP's website and stuff like that, with the discount code for your membership, which is going to be Geekoto 15, and you get 15% off. Your when you sign up with for your membership. So take advantage of that on that. One of the things that again, there were so many questions that were just kind of answered naturally, which is fantastic. But when it comes to like copyright and enforcement, like internationally. Mm-hmm. How does that work?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky because it's unfortunate that a lot of times the answer is it will be more trouble than it's worth to run down. Even if you're right, it will be more trouble. There are some countries that are simply copyright black holes where your work, you may be able to trace exactly where your work is being used and how it's been stolen and everything else. And
so I'm going to jump in really quick. And China and Russia are two of them, because both of them, I unfortunately had my work stolen on there. And somebody very knowledgeable said, yeah, dude, it's not worth it.
Yeah. And that's a shame. But there are other countries where you can fight for your copyright protections. And there's this thing that the U.S. became a signatory of back in the 80s called the Berne Convention, and it has 180-something countries. And essentially what it says is that everyone who's part of this treaty agrees that the copyright laws in their country will be at least as protective as the ones in the person's home country. And that sounds really good on paper, and it is for big cases. But when I was a practicing copyright attorney, I had a number of cases that occurred in Europe, and we could have followed those up and we could have pursued that, but it required first that we hire a local counsel in that country who's familiar with those areas. And that's only beneficial if the case is so big that it's worth hiring multiple attorneys in multiple countries, right? The fact is that you still have those rights, you still have those protections, but it's a lot harder to exercise those rights. And so, international copyright can be really hit or miss. Now, the last thing I'll say is there are some situations where the first thing to look for on international copyright is if that company who stole your work in another country happens to have any kind of office in the U.S., then you have some leverage. Then you can go and write a letter. Then you can go and try to make something happen because you can pursue them in U.S. courts. That makes all the difference.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's something. That's something. All right. So where can some of our listeners go to learn a little bit more about ASMP?
Yeah. Well, the best place is just asmp.org. And you'll find a whole bunch of information that's on there. And one of the things I wanted to definitely say before we close, there are a couple of things, but we've been really happy to have Geekoto as a corporate member of ours. And part of the reason is that just like you, we want to partner with companies that care about this profession and want to move the profession forward. And our members care about that too. And so, simply by already being in the Geekoto ecosystem, all your listeners and viewers here, you're working with a company that supports organizations like ASMP, and that makes a difference. It makes a difference whether you ever become a member or not. And we really want to thank you and thank Geekoto for supporting us in that way. And then I'll close with when you go to our website, you're going to see things about our 80-year history. You're going to see all the luminaries that were part of what we do and all the things that happen. But what ASMP has been able to do, and you've alluded to this a few times over the last 80 years, is continue to adapt and change to the environment that we find ourselves in the visual creative world. And if you have ever heard of ASMP from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, it's a different organization now. one of the best things that that the organization has done was bring on our new Chief Operating Officer, Melanie Porter. And Melanie and I work together to make sure that ASMP is a forward-thinking organization and one that is not only reacting to what's going on in the world, but trying to get in front of things that are going to affect all visual creators. It's the great thing about ASMP, and this is the part that makes me so happy, is that when I write an amicus brief, for example, the U.S. Supreme Court, I'm not writing on behalf of my membership. I'm writing on behalf of every photographer and every videographer. And the work that we do, whether you're ever a member or not, we'd love for you to be, but it's okay if you're not, because we will still fight for you, right? And that's what we're about. And so I'm really proud of this organization and very happy to have you be a part of it as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Again, like I said, we love the fact that we are collaborating, that we are part of ASMP. Me personally, I'm gonna say as a creator, I'm very proud to be part of ASMP. As a company, Geekoto, we're obviously very, very proud in the fact that you're one of the very few, and I'll go as far to say that you're the guys are the only ones who are changing things, who are making things different for the industry itself. Because you guys, unfortunately, are some of the other organizations that we know either focus on photography or videography or whatever, and not necessarily just the creative aspect of it, because that's what it has evolved to. Now it's a creative realm. And to know that there are organizations, that there are people who are seeing that and seeing the change on that, it's fantastic. So again, we're very, very proud to be part of ASMP as well, and thank you for all those kind words. Like I mentioned, guys, a lot of these links and stuff like that, we'll put them down below, so you guys go and check them out. Again, also Geekoto 15 will give you 50% off your when you enroll as a member for ASMP. They have different levels. You don't have to go. And I think you said they start at $99,
$100.
$100. Yep. So $85, man. $85 to have a little peace of mind. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be great. So now one question that I want to say, now with everything that we've saying, watermarking.
Yeah.
Like, really, is it still useful? Is it outdated? Here's one of the things. Recently I have been on a kick of this guy who makes these really short films, and it's Jim Goodman, I believe, and I think he's low. I don't know. He's local to Dallas, and he makes this beautiful, like, little 5-minute documentaries about like historic buildings and stuff like that from Dallas and Fort Worth and the surrounding thing. Like, they're actually really, really good, really good. The one thing that it has is that he puts his watermark on the middle of the thing, and even though I'm hearing the voice and the history, I cannot take my eyes off of that. Now, I've always been very anti-watermark. I never watermarked any of my stuff, especially not directly on my work. I just thought it was distracting to it. But I'm curious to hear from you. What do you think about watermarking? Is it still useful, or is it outdated?
So I have always been in the anti-watermark camp, even when I was a photographer. My belief was that anything that distracted a potential buyer from your work is negative. So period. I will give you only one caveat, and that is I mentioned earlier the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is an adjunct to the 1976 Copyright Act. There's a section of that act that talks about what's called copyright management information. And there's an extra penalty if someone takes your watermark off an image. So if they crop it out or something like that, you can get a little bit more money from them. To me, that has never outweighed the negative visual impact of not having watermarks. Now, I know a lot of people swear by watermarks. This was an unpopular opinion when I had it 20 years ago. I get that some people really care about their watermarks. I will tell you, from a functional perspective, there's almost no difference in copyright law whether it's on there or not. The only thing is it's a bit of a better argument to say, well, you knew it wasn't yours because it had someone else's name on it. Fine. You knew it wasn't yours anyway. You got it, in a bad way. So, I am in the anti-watermark camp, although if you feel strongly about it, go for it. You may get a little bit more money if you ever have to actually sue a person, which is incredibly unlikely that you're going to ever sue someone for copyright. Yeah. You will probably settle if you have to get in a fight. So
yeah, that's fair enough. Fair enough. So again, those of you who use your watermark, fantastic. That's great. I've never been a fan of it. If Tom didn't either, but you can get a little extra cash. So I guess that's a good thing. I mean,
Yeah, that's not an official ASMP position. We have no position on watermarking.
Yeah, exactly. So, that was a personal one. But I had to ask that question just because, again, Goodman, I want to say it's Jim Goodman. I hope I got it right. But anyways, he has these awesome things, and he's local to us, in some of the stuff that he does. He does great work. Just the watermark. I'm like, oh my God. I was like, dude, I know it's you. So that part was it.
I know we're wrapping up, but to me, what watermarking means is that you think that things on the internet are free and you have to put your name on them for you to be protected or for people to know you or anything else. And if there's any single thing we fight against more than anything else, it's that just because it's on the internet, it's not free. Right. And that's something that everyone should keep in mind and care about.
That's awesome. That's actually a great closing thought. So, Tom, thank you again for being here.
Thank you.
You've been a mountain of information. This is not the first time we're going to do this. We're going to do this, and hopefully, if you guys want, guys, we'll come in and we'll do these relatively often, once a month. Twice, every 3 months, whatever, we can make time for that. Tom, he's a very busy man. Like I said, he's the head of CEO of ASMP and stuff like that. But we'll also, you talked about Melanie earlier today, so we'll get her in here as well, because I do want to have that she's a female. It's something that definitely needs to be known. It's, because there is a change. There is a change within ASMP, and when Melanie came in, I've known Melanie for many years. So it's definitely a view that we need to have in here. So again, thank you so much, guys. All of you guys who stuck through the whole thing, thank you so much. If you're a photographer, if you're a filmmaker, if you're a creator, if you're listening right now, remember that the fight for your rights, they're real. All right. They're here. There's people that are on your side, about everything that is kind of happening right now. Visit asmp.org, get involved, stay protected, be part of something that is bigger than you, because that's what it is. The reason why Geekoto, tries to push as much as we can is because we want to make a difference for you. We are creators. Everyone who is part of Geekoto, we're photographers, we're videographers, we're content creators, we're gamers, streamers, everything. So we are in there in the trenches with you guys, and we want to give you the best tools and show you great tools, as ASMP will be, in your corner of that. Again, until next time, guys, thank you so much for everything that you have, for staying here. Like I said, all of the links and everything are going to be down below for everyone to see and share. And again, thank you. Make sure you stay connected, and we will see you all very, very soon. Again, Tom, thank you again. Do you have anything else before we go?
No, thank you.
That's
it was great. Can't wait to do it again.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. And we will see you very, very soon.